They paired the alien princess with a human in Jest. No one expected her to return with a child. Alien delegates from dozens of worlds had gathered, their forms strange and beautiful, tentacles that shimmered like liquid, wings that glowed faintly, eyes that floated independently across their faces. But among all the aliens, the human envoy, Daniel Kor, stood out, not because he was remarkable, but because he was ordinary. Daniel shifted uncomfortably on his feet, adjusting his crisp uniform. He was tall, perhaps a little too tall for comfort, with brown hair that refused to stay in place, and a nervous grin that he hoped looked diplomatic. He had spent months preparing for this visit to the Galorith system, reading every text he could find on alien etiquette, but nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could prepare anyone for what was about to happen. At the center of the hall, atop a dais carved from iridescent stone, stood Princess Lyra. She was young by alien standards, her skin a soft pearl color that seemed to shift with the light, and her eyes were the size of Daniel's fists, reflecting the hall like twin mirrors. She had been watching Daniel with amusement from the moment he entered, her delicate fingers resting lightly on the crystal railing. The head of the council, an elder with 3 floating eyes and a voice like chimes, cleared his throat. "Esteemed delegates," he began, his tone formal but with a note of humor hidden beneath the surface. "Today we celebrate the arrival of our human guest, and in the spirit of interstellar goodwill," he paused, a smile twitching at the edges of his mandibles. "We propose a pairing." A murmur ran through the hall. Some aliens tilted their heads in curiosity, others in disbelief. Daniel swallowed nervously. "A pairing?" he repeated, unsure if he had heard correctly. The head of the council's eyes floated lazily to him. "Yes. A temporary partnership between our young Princess Lyra and our human friend." Daniel blinked. "A partnership?" The council erupted in laughter. Not loud or violent, but the kind of laughter that echoed in crystal chambers and made Daniel feel small. Whispers floated around him. Humans are simple, humans are amusing, humans are always trying but rarely succeed. Princess Lyra stepped forward, her movements elegant and precise. She raised one hand and the hall quieted. "So they pair me with a human," she said softly, though the sound carried easily to the far corners. "They think this will be a jest, a joke to humiliate me." Her eyes met Daniel's. There was no mockery in them, only curiosity. And something else, a spark of amusement, a challenge. Daniel's throat went dry. I don't know what to say," he stammered. Lyra smiled faintly. "You may not have to say anything, but I do hope you are prepared for a learning experience." The council clapped politely, though some delegates exchanged glances. Humans were unpredictable, after all. Pairing one with a royal princess might result in chaos, or entertainment, or perhaps both. That evening, Daniel and Lyra were led to a quiet garden on the palace grounds. The garden was vast, filled with plants that shimmered with colors he had never seen before. Flowers that glowed faintly, trees with leaves like thin sheets of metal, and a fountain where water floated above the basin in a gentle spiral. Lyra gestured for him to sit on a bench made of smooth crystal. "You must be tired," she said politely, "after your long journey." I am," Daniel admitted. He glanced around the garden. "It's beautiful." "Yes," Lyra said, her eyes following a cluster of floating petals. "The council hopes to impress you, but mostly they hope to see you fail." Daniel laughed nervously. "Fail? I'm not sure how one fails at this." Lyra tilted her head, considering him. "Many humans fail in subtle ways. They overthink, they underestimate, they misread cues. I wonder which one you will do first." "I'll try not to do any of those," Daniel said, smiling. Lyra laughed softly, a musical sound that seemed to harmonize with the gentle hum of the garden. "Good. Try at least. That is all I ask." Over the next days, the pairing was official. Daniel would live in the palace as a guest, accompanying Lyra as she carried out her duties. It was supposed to be awkward. It was supposed to be embarrassing. But instead, something unusual happened. Daniel's curiosity matched Lyra's. His willingness to learn and adapt impressed her, and his quiet humor, clumsy, sometimes awkward, made her laugh in ways no alien had before. One morning, as they walked through a corridor of living crystal, Lyra stopped and looked at him seriously. "Tell me, human," she said, "what do you think of us, of this council?" Daniel considered carefully. "You are organized, precise, elegant, you plan everything. But I think you forget something sometimes. You forget that the world changes faster than anyone can predict. You think a plan is perfect, but even a perfect plan can be improved if you listen. Lyra studied him. Interesting. Many here believe humans are simple, but you see complexity. I try, Daniel said humbly, and I try to learn. I don't know your ways, but I want to understand. She smiled faintly. Then perhaps this pairing is not a jest after all. The palace staff watched with quiet fascination. Lyra's choice to treat Daniel as an equal rather than a curiosity was bold. And Daniel, in turn, was careful, thoughtful, and unassuming, qualities the aliens often overlooked, but ones that mattered more than they realized. Weeks passed, and the two developed routines. They attended council meetings together. Daniel tried to understand alien politics, taking notes in a small, worn notebook he carried everywhere. Lyra introduced him to ceremonial dances, ancient games of logic, and the delicate art of interstellar diplomacy. In turn, Daniel showed Lyra simple human problem-solving techniques, ways to organize tasks, find creative solutions to small crises, and negotiate with patience rather than power. It was during one of these lessons that Lyra paused, holding a small crystal tablet that displayed the Council's annual resource allocations. "Humans," she said thoughtfully, "you always seem to find a way to make things work even with less." "Why?" Daniel smiled. "We make do. We don't have everything, but we try to be clever with what we have. Sometimes that makes a difference." Lyra considered this, tapping the tablet lightly. "Perhaps that is why you are interesting, not in strength or magic, but in thought. Your mind adapts." The council's laughter at the pairing began to fade. Slowly, delegates noticed that Daniel was not just surviving the assignment, he was thriving. He asked questions no alien had thought to ask. He noticed patterns, suggested alternatives, and, most surprisingly, he made Lyra laugh with stories of Earth. Stories of crowded cities, small mistakes that became adventures, and humans' endless curiosity about the stars. One evening they sat in the garden again, watching twin moons rise over the palace walls. Lyra's expression was softer, thoughtful. "I believe," she said quietly, "that this pairing is teaching us something about humans we never expected, and perhaps about ourselves." Daniel felt a swell of pride, though he kept his expression neutral. "And what do you think we are learning?" he asked. Lyra's eyes reflected both moons. "That even the smallest gestures, the quietest thoughts, can change the world." The human smiled, unsure if she meant him personally or humanity in general. Perhaps both. As the weeks turned into months, the pairing grew into a true partnership, not romantic, at least not yet, but a bond of respect and curiosity. The council's joke, meant to humiliate, instead showcased humanity's quiet brilliance. And Daniel, once nervous and unsure, realized something extraordinary. He was no longer just a guest in an alien world. He was a bridge. A small, ordinary human, perhaps, but one capable of extraordinary influence through thought, patience, and understanding. Princess Lyra watched him with a hint of amusement, knowing the council's jest had backfired magnificently. And Daniel, though unaware of the full extent, began to see that perhaps humans were not so small after all. In the glittering halls of the Galarith Palace, a quiet revolution was beginning, not with weapons or conquest, but with patience, wit, and the simple brilliance of a human mind. The early morning light spilled gently over the palace gardens, painting the strange, glowing flora in shades of gold and pink. The floating petals of the Galarith flowers shimmered as if the sun had touched them directly, and the crystal fountains sang softly with the sound of water suspended in midair. Daniel Kor walked carefully along the polished pathways, notebook tucked under his arm, glancing around in awe at the alien beauty. Princess Lyra waited for him beside a small pond where bioluminescent fish swirled lazily in mid-water, their tails leaving faint trails of sparkling light. She waved at him, her pearl-like skin catching the sun. "Good morning, human," she said lightly. "You are punctual today." Daniel smiled, a little embarrassed. "I try. The last time I was late, I nearly tripped over a whatever that glowing vine is. Is it safe?" Lyra laughed, a soft sound that seemed to mix with the gentle hum of the garden. "Yes, it is harmless. It is only dangerous if you step on it without noticing. A small lesson in attention." He nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. "Attention, got it. Don't step on glowing vines. Simple enough." "Simple, yes," Lyra said, "but humans often overlook simple things. And yet sometimes the simplest things change everything." Daniel frowned, intrigued. "Change everything? How?" She gestured to the pond. Watch! A small fish drifted near the surface, flicking its fins. Then with a sudden movement, it shot into the air, landed on the water's surface in a tiny splash, and vanished back into the depths. Lyra smiled. That is how change works, subtle, quiet, unexpected. One small action can ripple outward unseen until the world feels different. Daniel looked thoughtful. So, even humans can make ripples that big? Lyra's eyes sparkled. I think you already do, Daniel, in ways you may not even realize. Over the next several weeks, Daniel and Lyra spent nearly every day together. They attended council meetings, where Daniel quietly observed alien logic and procedures. He noticed patterns, small inefficiencies, and areas where human thinking might offer solutions. Lyra encouraged him to speak up, despite the initial laughter and skepticism of other delegates. One day, during a meeting about resource allocation, a minor problem arose. One of the alien factions complained that the floating energy sources were distributed unfairly. The discussion was heated, the kind of debate where no one really listened, only spoke louder. Daniel raised his hand timidly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but polite. "I think there might be a way to share the energy differently so everyone benefits." Several delegates glanced at him skeptically. Humans rarely solved problems without conflict or struggle, and many expected him to fail. Lyra, however, gave him a small, encouraging nod. "Go on, human." Daniel opened his notebook and began to explain a simple system of rotation. It was based on timing and priority, ensuring that no faction was left without energy at critical moments. He used charts and examples, simple logic that humans used all the time back on Earth. At first, the council was silent. Then slowly the alien delegates began nodding, whispering among themselves. By the end of the meeting, they agreed to try Daniel's suggestion as a pilot program. Lyra's eyes were bright. "See," she said quietly, "humans are underestimated. And yet they often hold the key to balance." Daniel blinked. "Balance key? I didn't know it would work that well." "Perhaps that is why humans are interesting," Lyra said. "You do not always see the rules first, you see the possibilities." Outside the council chambers, Lyra led Daniel to a smaller room filled with holographic maps of the galaxy. "If you are to understand us," she said, "you must understand the stars." Daniel studied the maps, noting the various star systems, trade routes, and colonies. "This is incredible," he said. "There's so much here, so many possibilities." Lyra smiled faintly. "Yes, but possibilities must be guided carefully. One wrong move and a star system could lose everything. That is why we plan, but sometimes too much planning makes us slow." "Too rigid?" Daniel tilted his head. "So humans help by being flexible?" "Yes," Lyra said. "Flexible, clever, persistent, you adapt, you improvise. That is why you survive in ways we do not always expect." It was moments like this that made their pairing unusual. Where most aliens relied on precision, humans relied on ingenuity. Where most aliens calculated, humans experimented. And where most aliens expected compliance, humans asked questions and often found better answers. One afternoon, Lyra took Daniel to the palace library, a vast hall with shelves stretching to impossible heights. Floating platforms hovered in the aisles, allowing readers to reach books and scrolls of all sizes. She handed him a small tablet. "Learn our history," she said. "Understand how we govern, how we think, and how we adapt. Then tell me where humans might help." Daniel laughed softly. "That's a lot to learn." Lyra's expression was serious. "Then start small. Humans can teach patience, observation, and cleverness. That is more than many of my people know." He spent hours in the library, poring over texts, asking questions, and taking careful notes. Lyra watched him silently at first, then began joining him in study sessions. Together, they debated ideas, compared philosophies, and even shared small human games, puzzles, riddles, and logic exercises that both entertained and challenged the princess. One evening, as the twin moons rose outside the library's glass walls, Lyra leaned back on a floating chair. "You know, human," she said thoughtfully, "I believe the council underestimated you. They expected laughter, they expected failure, but you make them reconsider." Daniel smiled. "I'm just trying to help, I don't want to fail." "Sometimes the smallest efforts change everything," Lyra said softly. "You have already changed me, Daniel, in ways they cannot see yet." He felt a warmth in his chest, a strange mix of pride and humility. It was not the kind of pride that comes from power or wealth, but the kind that comes from being trusted, being needed, and being understood. As the months passed, their routines became predictable but never boring. Daniel learned the etiquette of alien dining, the subtle art of Galarithian negotiation, and the hidden meaning behind their formal dances. Lyra, in turn, learned to see the value of simplicity, human curiosity, and persistence. They faced small challenges together: a malfunctioning communication orb, a miscalculated supply shipment, and even a diplomatic dispute between two minor factions. Each time, Daniel's calm thinking and innovative solutions solved problems that seemed unsolvable to the aliens. One day, while walking through a courtyard filled with floating lanterns, Lyra spoke quietly. "You have taught me something, human, that even when the rules are strict, even when everything seems certain, there is room for creativity, room for change." Daniel nodded. "Humans survive because we look for possibilities. We do not always follow rules, but we do try to make sense of them. Maybe that is why we adapt." Lyra smiled faintly. "Adaptability, yes, perhaps that is why the Council's joke has failed." He laughed softly. "Failed. Because," she said, "we have found harmony, unexpected, simple, powerful." The bond between human and princess grew stronger, not romantic, not yet, but in trust, curiosity, and respect. Daniel noticed that Lyra laughed more freely, asked more questions, and even shared stories of her childhood, a childhood of expectation, precision, and duty. "You always wanted to be more than a princess?" Daniel asked one evening as they watched the sky. Lyra nodded. "I wanted to understand, to explore, to learn, but my people, they expect perfection. They do not expect mistakes. They do not expect humans." Daniel smiled. "Maybe that's good. Maybe humans are meant to surprise them." Lyra's eyes softened. "You are right. And perhaps that is why we will do something unexpected, something they cannot anticipate." Daniel tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" "You will see," she said with a smile. "Patience, human, all in due time." And so the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. Daniel adapted to the alien world, and the aliens slowly adapted to him. The Council's joke, the pairing meant to entertain at the expense of both human and princess, had quietly turned into something extraordinary. Humans, it seemed, had a way of turning jokes into lessons, challenges into opportunities, and curiosity into influence. Daniel and Lyra had not just survived, they had begun to thrive together. And as Lyra led Daniel through the palace gardens one last evening before a council review, she looked at him with a mixture of pride and amusement. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we are not so different human after all." Daniel laughed, looking at the glowing flowers and shimmering fountains. "Maybe not. Maybe we're just unexpected." And in that quiet harmony, something remarkable was beginning, a partnership that no one, not even the council, could have predicted. The Galarith council chambers were quieter than usual that morning. Crystal light filtered through the translucent walls, casting patterns like waves across the polished floors. Delegates from dozens of worlds had gathered, their forms shimmering in the morning light. Among them, Daniel Core felt unusually calm. He had grown used to these meetings over the past months, learning the rhythms, the formalities, and the subtle ways the aliens communicated without words. Princess Lyra sat beside him, her posture elegant, her eyes scanning the room. She had grown accustomed to Daniel's presence, but more than that, she had grown to trust his instincts, his observations, and his clever thinking. What had begun as a jest, a council joke meant to entertain, had transformed into a quiet alliance, and today, that alliance would be tested. A minor problem had arisen in the council. A series of supply routes for energy crystals had become disrupted. The routes, essential to many star systems, were affected by orbital shifts and unexpected migration patterns of the floating crystal fields. The council had debated the issue for weeks, but the delegates were divided, each faction protecting its own interests. "Perhaps we can try a new approach," Daniel said quietly to Lyra as the session began. She raised an eyebrow. "Go on, human, I am listening." Daniel stood carefully. He was no longer nervous about speaking in front of the council. He had learned how to command attention without arrogance. "Instead of assigning routes based on tradition," he began, "perhaps we can assign them based on need and efficiency. We could create a schedule that rotates the resources fairly. That way, no faction has priority all the time, and everyone benefits evenly." Whispers rippled through the chamber. Several delegates tilted their floating eyes at him, skeptical. Humans were clever, yes, but could they truly understand the complexity of alien resource management? Lyra gave him a small nod, and Daniel continued. We could monitor energy usage with the same system. Any excess could be redistributed. It is not perfect, but it can solve short-term conflicts and improve trust among factions. The room fell silent. Then slowly one of the elder delegates spoke. It is unconventional, but perhaps it could work. The council agreed to implement Daniel's plan as a test. The murmurs of skepticism remained, but a small ripple of curiosity had begun. Over the next few days, Daniel worked closely with Lyra to adjust the plan. They spent hours analyzing crystal migration patterns, calculating the needs of different systems, and creating a schedule that balanced efficiency with fairness. Lyra marveled at Daniel's ability to see patterns in chaos, to take seemingly unrelated facts and connect them in a way that made sense. You are remarkable, she said one evening as they reviewed the schedules in the library. Not because of strength or titles or traditions, but because of thought. You see connections that others ignore. Daniel smiled modestly. I just notice things, that's all. Humans survive by noticing what others overlook. Lyra leaned back, watching him carefully. Perhaps that is why humans are underestimated. You adapt without arrogance. You change without demanding recognition. He felt a warm glow at her words. The human influence, quiet as it was beginning to be acknowledged, even by an alien princess. The first tests of the new energy schedule began smoothly. Delegates monitored the flows through holographic panels, watching as the crystals moved through the systems according to Daniel's plan. Small successes quickly turned into larger ones. Systems that had previously faced shortages now had steady energy, and minor disputes between factions began to resolve themselves. The council was astonished. A human, whom they had paired with their princess as a joke, had solved a problem that had confounded them for years. In private, Lyra smiled at Daniel. Do you realize what you've done? She asked quietly. I helped them, Daniel said. He was unsure how to take her tone, pride, awe, or amusement. Yes, she said softly. You helped them see that humans are not reckless, not chaotic, clever. Thoughtful, useful, Daniel laughed. I guess they underestimated me. Lyra's smile was mischievous. They underestimated all of us, but that is the advantage of being unexpected. As the weeks went on, the council began to notice other ways in which Daniel's perspective could help. He suggested improvements in communication protocols, simple adjustments to resource tracking, and even minor architectural changes to the council chambers that allowed delegates to interact more easily. The alien society, often rigid and slow-moving, began to adapt. Delegates who had once dismissed Daniel as a human curiosity now sought his advice. And all the while, Lyra stood beside him, silently supporting him, guiding him when necessary, and occasionally teasing him about human customs he had forgotten. One afternoon, they visited a remote colony on a floating platform in orbit around a distant star. The colony had struggled with energy shortages for decades, relying on inefficient methods to gather and store crystals. Daniel observed the systems carefully, asked questions, and then offered solutions. Within hours, the colony's efficiency improved dramatically. The colonists were astonished. This human, he thinks differently, one elder said quietly. Not with brute force, not with authority, but with clarity and logic. Perhaps he is useful. Lyra watched with quiet satisfaction. Yes, humans have a way of turning problems into opportunities. Daniel, unaware of the full extent of the praise, simply smiled. He enjoyed the challenge, the learning, and the unexpected beauty of the alien worlds he now called home. Back at the palace, Lyra and Daniel reflected on their progress. The council's jest, Lyra said thoughtfully, was meant to embarrass us both. But we have turned it into advantage, not through trickery, not through strength, but through intelligence and patience. Daniel nodded. Humans, we survive by adapting, by trying, by looking for solutions others overlook. I didn't expect it to work this well. Lyra's eyes softened. Nor did I, but it does, and the council is beginning to see it too. Perhaps it is time for a new idea, a way to show them the true value of humans quietly without boasting. Daniel leaned back, curious. And what might that be? Patience, she said. Wait and observe. Let them discover it themselves. Let them realize that humans are not a joke, but a bridge between worlds, between ideas, between possibilities. One evening, they walked in the palace gardens, bathed in the glow of twin moons. Lyra stopped at a pond, watching the ripples of floating fish. Do you see, Daniel? She asked. Even the smallest action, the tiniest adjustment can change everything. Daniel nodded, like the energy schedule or the colony. Yes, Lyra said softly. Humans are small in numbers, yet powerful in thought. They can change what seems fixed. That is why the Council underestimated you, and why they will continue to underestimate humans, until it is too late. He smiled a little nervously. Too late. Not in danger, Lyra said gently, but too late for them to claim superiority. Humans are not the strongest, not the most elegant, not the most disciplined, but clever, adaptable, persistent, and they leave a mark. Daniel felt a quiet pride. Not pride of power, but pride of understanding, of influence, of being seen and trusted. He realized that what he and Lyra were building was more than a friendship. It was a partnership, a subtle revolution, a bridge between two civilizations. The following day, a small crisis arose in the council, minor but potentially embarrassing. A miscommunication between factions threatened to delay a major trade agreement. Delegates began to argue, voices rising. Lyra glanced at Daniel and he nodded slightly, understanding immediately. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped forward. "May I suggest a compromise?" he said politely but firmly. All eyes turned to him. Whispers filled the chamber. He outlined a solution that balanced the interests of each faction, using principles of fairness and efficiency he had developed in his time with Lyra. Slowly, the council agreed, implementing the plan immediately. The dispute was resolved and the delegates exchanged cautious glances. Lyra smiled at him quietly. "See, patience, observation, and clarity, a human solution." Daniel laughed softly. "I guess we're slowly changing their view." "Yes," Lyra said, her voice gentle but firm. "And the most important change is the one they do not yet recognize. The value of humans, of perspective, of thought, of adaptability. That is the turning point." As the sun set on the Galarith Palace, Daniel and Lyra walked through the gardens in silence, the glowing flora reflecting in their eyes. The council may have begun as skeptics, but slowly, quietly, they were learning a truth that could not be ignored. Humans were clever, adaptable, and invaluable. And in that quiet harmony, in that unexpected partnership, something extraordinary had begun. A ripple that would continue to grow, shaping the galaxy in ways no one could yet predict. The Galarith Council had never been quieter. Not because the delegates were displeased, but because they were watching closely, curious to see what would happen next. The months of observation and subtle guidance by Daniel Kor, the human envoy, had already changed many of their perceptions. He was no longer the awkward guest or a subject of jest. He was slowly but undeniably a source of solutions they could not ignore. Princess Lyra sat beside him at the council dais, her posture calm, her expression thoughtful. Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. Pride, because he had finally begun to see his human qualities being valued. Nervousness, because this moment would show the council just how powerful those qualities could be. The day's issue was complex. A coalition of minor systems was struggling to maintain trade routes between star systems. Disputes over resources, schedules, and routes threatened to collapse months of carefully arranged diplomacy. The council had debated solutions for weeks, but no proposal had satisfied all parties. Lyra turned to Daniel. "Do you have a suggestion?" she asked quietly, her eyes reflecting confidence in him. Daniel hesitated for only a moment. Then, with careful clarity, he stood. "Yes," he said, "but it requires thinking differently, not just rearranging rules. We need to focus on efficiency, fairness, and communication at the same time." Several delegates shifted, curious. A human, speaking in his simple, calm voice, had begun to command attention in ways they had not expected. He began by explaining a system of rotation that balanced resource distribution while preventing delays. Each system would have access to trade routes in timed intervals, monitored by a network of automated sensors. Daniel suggested using holographic communication to keep each system informed, allowing adjustments in real time. He paused, glancing at Lyra. "This is not perfect," he said, "but it is adaptable. Problems will arise. But if each system can communicate clearly and follow simple principles, we can solve them together." The council listened, rapt. Some of the older delegates were skeptical, but even they could not ignore the clarity of his logic. Slowly, they began to nod. Lyra added her voice to his explanation. "This human solution is more than numbers and schedules. It is cooperation, observation, adaptability." The council agreed to try the plan on a limited scale. Within hours, Daniel worked with Lyra and the council's engineers to adjust the system. Holographic projections were set up, sensors were placed, and each star system began receiving instructions. The result was immediate. Trade routes flowed smoothly, resources arrived on time, and minor disputes dissolved before they could escalate. Delegates whispered to each other in amazement. Later, as they walked through the palace gardens, Lyra turned to Daniel. "Do you see? They are beginning to understand your value, quietly, without words, without force, just thought, patience, and observation." Daniel smiled. I didn't expect it to work this well. I thought maybe some systems would resist." "They did," Lyra said, "but humans are persistent. You adapt, you observe, and you adjust. That is the advantage. That is why they cannot ignore you." Daniel looked around at the glowing flora, at the floating petals and shimmering fountains. "I suppose humans are underestimated for that reason, not strength, not numbers. But thought." "Yes," Lyra said. "Cleverness, adaptability, patience, that is your advantage, and it is slowly being revealed to the galaxy." The next weeks were filled with small but remarkable successes. Daniel's ideas improved communication between star systems, streamlined resource management, and even influenced minor aspects of council diplomacy. Systems that had once been at odds now cooperated. Delegates who had once laughed at the pairing now consulted Daniel directly, often seeking Lyra's confirmation. One day, the council received an unexpected visitor, a group of scholars from a distant system, curious about the human and the princess. They had heard reports of the trade route success and came to learn the methods behind it. Daniel explained his approach in simple terms: observe patterns, adapt to circumstances, and communicate clearly. Lyra demonstrated the system in action using holographic projections. The scholars were impressed, amazed by the practical brilliance of a human mind. "This human," one scholar whispered to another, "he thinks differently, not by authority, not by tradition, but by observation, by creativity." Lyra overheard the comment and smiled faintly. "Yes," she said softly, "and that is why humans are powerful in ways the galaxy has not yet realized." Back at the palace, Lyra and Daniel reflected on their progress. "The council's joke," Lyra said thoughtfully, "was meant to amuse themselves. But we have revealed something more. The human advantage is not in strength, not in authority, not in wealth. It is in thought, adaptability, and understanding." Daniel nodded. "I never thought being human would be enough, but it seems it is." "Yes," Lyra said. "Enough to influence a council, to change trade routes, to inspire scholars. Enough to make a difference without conflict, without boasting. That is your power." He smiled, realizing how much he had grown since the first day he had arrived at the palace. He was no longer just a guest. He was a partner, a teacher, and a bridge between two civilizations. One evening, as they walked in the floating gardens, Lyra paused near a crystalline fountain. "Do you understand what we have done?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked around at the glowing flowers, the floating lanterns, the distant stars. "We changed things quietly, without fighting, without force, just thought, patience, and action." "Yes," Lyra said. "We have shown the Council, the galaxy, that humans are clever, adaptable, and valuable, and it is only the beginning." Daniel tilted his head. "Only the beginning?" Lyra smiled. "Yes, there is more to reveal, more ways humans can shape understanding, diplomacy, and cooperation. But we must be patient. Let the ripple grow." The next morning, Daniel received a message from a distant colony. The automated energy and trade system he had designed had been implemented successfully without supervision. Resources were balanced, disputes were minimal, and efficiency had increased by over 30%. He showed the report to Lyra. "They did it without guidance," he said in surprise. Lyra's eyes sparkled. "Exactly, that is the beauty of a human approach. Systems work when people understand them, adapt them, and communicate, not because of force or orders, but because they see value in logic and fairness." Daniel realized the significance. Humans, he thought, had a subtle kind of power, influence without dominance, progress without conflict. That was their strength. As the months passed, their influence continued to grow. The council began to implement Daniel's ideas in other areas: education systems, resource planning, and interstellar communication. Delegates who had once doubted him now praised his ingenuity. Aliens from other systems traveled to learn from the human envoy and the princess, studying the methods they had developed. Lyra observed quietly, guiding him when needed, but allowing the human to take the lead. Together, they had revealed the human advantage, not with weapons, not with force, not with grand proclamations, but through thought, observation, patience, and clever action. One evening, they sat in the palace garden under the twin moons. Daniel looked up at the glowing sky. "I never thought being human could make such a difference," he said quietly. Lyra reached out and touched his hand gently. "You underestimated yourself," she said. "Humans are clever, adaptable, persistent. You change the world quietly, but the effect is enormous." Daniel smiled softly. "I suppose that is the real advantage of humans. We are underestimated, yet capable." "Yes," Lyra said, "and the galaxy will remember it, even if slowly. Your advantage is revealed not by force, but by insight, creativity, and the ability to adapt." Daniel felt a sense of pride unlike anything he had ever known. He was a human, yes, but now he was more. A bridge, a teacher, a partner in shaping a galaxy that had once laughed at his kind. The next morning, the council convened again, this time to discuss a new initiative, sharing knowledge across systems to prevent conflicts and improve trade. Lyra presented Daniel's proposal, giving credit to him fully. The council was silent at first, then erupted in approval. Delegates nodded, whispered, and some even clapped lightly. The human envoy had not only solved problems, they had improved the galaxy's systems of cooperation. Lyra turned to Daniel. "See, the advantage is revealed, quietly, cleverly, completely, and this is only the beginning." Daniel looked out at the chamber, the delegates, and the distant stars. He realized she was right. Humans had an advantage unlike any other, not in strength, not in authority, not in numbers, but in thought, adaptability, patience, and ingenuity. And now the galaxy was beginning to see it. Years had passed since Daniel Kor first arrived at the Galarith Palace as a nervous, unsure human envoy. What had begun as a joke, the council pairing him with Princess Lyra, had transformed into something extraordinary. Their quiet partnership had reshaped trade routes, improved communication between star systems, and inspired countless scholars to rethink the value of human thought. Yet the most unexpected chapter was still ahead. The day began quietly in the palace gardens. Twin suns bathed the iridescent flora in warm light, and floating petals drifted gently through the air. Lyra, now taller and more confident than ever, walked beside a small figure holding her hand. The child's hair was the soft pearl of the Galariths, but the eyes were unmistakably human, bright, curious, and wide with wonder. Daniel, visiting from Earth, had been informed that Lyra would reveal a surprise to the council. Yet even he could not predict the magnitude of what was about to happen. As they entered the Grand Council Hall, delegates murmured in disbelief. The princess walked gracefully to the center, and beside her the child looked around with awe, taking in the shimmering walls, the floating lights, and the dozens of alien eyes upon them. "This is," whispered one elder, floating eyes wide. "This is impossible." "A human child here?" Lyra smiled gently. "Not impossible," she said softly, "only unexpected. The child you see is a symbol of partnership, of curiosity, of understanding." Daniel's heart swelled. He stepped forward quietly, observing the child's calm composure. The child, curious and unafraid, reached out to touch one of the floating lanterns, watching as it shimmered and reflected the colors of the hall. The council fell silent. They had prepared for a diplomatic discussion. They had not prepared for this, a living example of what humans and aliens could achieve together. Lyra continued, her voice clear and steady. "Many years ago, the council paired me with a human as a jest. It was meant to amuse, to embarrass, to test. Yet in the time since I have learned something important. Humans are not merely clever or unpredictable or amusing. They are transformative." She looked toward Daniel. "This human Daniel Kor has shown me, and through me the galaxy, what human ingenuity can accomplish. He observes, adapts, communicates, and creates solutions where none seemed possible. And together, we have built systems that improve trade, communication, and cooperation across star systems." The room was silent again, though this time it was a reverent silence. Delegates began to nod slowly, realization dawning on their faces. The human they had dismissed as a curiosity had quietly changed the galaxy. The child, sensing the attention, smiled and spoke in a soft voice that blended both human warmth and alien clarity. "Hello," the child said. "I want to help everyone." Gasps spread through the council. No one had expected the child to speak so confidently. Lyra knelt slightly, holding the child's hands gently. Yes, she said, and that is why this child represents more than my lineage. They represent potential, cooperation, and the future, a future where humans and aliens learn from one another. Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had never imagined that his simple curiosity, his willingness to learn and adapt, would lead to this moment. Standing in a council hall where humans were not just accepted, but celebrated, and where a child embodied a new kind of unity. Delegates began to ask questions, hesitantly at first. How do humans think? Asked one, its tentacles quivering. How do they solve problems? Lyra smiled. Humans observe, they adapt, they are persistent without demanding authority. They approach challenges creatively, finding solutions that are elegant, practical, and inclusive. That is why the galaxy has begun to benefit from human ingenuity. Daniel stepped forward, addressing the council directly, his voice calm but confident. Humans are not perfect, he said. We make mistakes. We are not always the fastest or strongest, but we try to understand, to adapt, to help. And when we work together with others, like Princess Lyra, like your civilizations, amazing things can happen. The council listened intently. No laughter, no dismissive whispers, only attention, respect, and growing admiration. Over the next few weeks, the child began attending lessons with both Daniel and Lyra. Their curiosity was insatiable. They learned the languages of the council, the logic of trade routes, and the small but powerful lessons of observation and patience. The child asked questions that amazed even the most experienced delegates. How do humans decide what is fair? The child asked one day, tilting its head in the library as holographic projections floated around them. Daniel smiled. We think about what helps everyone, not just ourselves. We try to imagine how others feel and what they need. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we always try, Lyra added, and we teach systems to work, not just people. Communication, observation, fairness, they all combine to make a stronger, more capable society. The delegates who visited to observe were astonished. They began to realize that humans had a subtle kind of power, influence without force, progress without domination, and creativity without arrogance. News of the child spread throughout the galaxy. Scholars, diplomats, and traders traveled to see the human-alien child and to learn from the partnership of Lyra and Daniel. The child became a symbol of unity, cooperation, and the quiet strength of humans. In council debates, human methods of problem-solving began to be respected. Ideas that emphasized observation, adaptation, and communication were implemented alongside traditional alien methods. Trade improved, disputes decreased, cooperation increased. And all the while, Daniel and Lyra remained patient, guiding subtly, never forcing, always teaching. One evening, Lyra and Daniel walked through the palace gardens, the child skipping happily ahead, fascinated by floating petals and glowing lanterns. You know, Daniel said quietly, I never imagined it would come to this. I thought humans were small, insignificant, but here, I see how much we can influence the galaxy without taking anything by force. Lyra smiled. Humans are underestimated because their influence is quiet. They do not demand attention, but they leave a mark. They adapt, observe, and persist. And when they partner with others like you have partnered with me, they can change everything. Daniel nodded. I suppose that's why the council's joke failed. They thought it was about amusement, but it was really about discovering the human advantage. Yes, Lyra said, and now it is revealed, not just through actions, but through legacy, through this child. The child ran back to them, holding a glowing petal in each hand. Look, they said, I want to help everyone. Daniel laughed softly. You already are. Lyra knelt and smiled at the child. Yes, little one, you already are, and one day you will continue what we started. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the palace, Daniel reflected on his journey. From a nervous envoy to a trusted partner, he had quietly shaped the galaxy in ways no one had expected. He had shown that humans were not the strongest, the fastest, or the most commanding, but their strength lay in creativity, patience, and adaptability. Lyra stood beside him, her expression serene. Do you understand now? She asked softly. Humans are more than we ever imagined. Not by power, but by influence, ingenuity, and heart. That is the true human advantage. Daniel looked out at the glowing horizon, at the floating gardens, the twin moons, and the council hall filled with admiration. Yes, he said quietly, I understand. Humans, we are underestimated, but quietly we can change the world. And the galaxy, Lyra added, and the galaxy will remember. The child laughed, running ahead to chase floating petals, their human-alien laughter echoing in the crystal halls. It was a sound that symbolized hope, unity, and the promise of a better future. The council, once dismissive and amused by the joke pairing, had been transformed. Through patience, intelligence, and quiet action, Daniel and Lyra had shown the galaxy what humans could achieve: cleverness, adaptability, and the power of observation and cooperation. And as the stars began to twinkle in the twin suns, fading light, the galaxy finally understood a truth that had been quietly waiting to be revealed. Humans were not just guests in the cosmos. Humans were builders, thinkers, and changers of worlds. And sometimes, the smallest and most underestimated beings leave the largest mark.